The evening rush at Bellini's had finally died down. The last customer had paid their bill 20 minutes ago, and now only the soft clink of dishes and the low hum of conversation among the staff filled the dimly lit restaurant. Tina wiped her brow with the back of her hand, careful not to smudge her makeup. After a 12-hour shift, her feet ached in her sensible black shoes, and her lower back had a dull throb that had become all too familiar. "You heading out?" asked Miguel, the bartender, as he polished a wine glass. Tina glanced at the clock on the wall. "Nearly midnight." "In a bit," she said. "Just need to finish tallying my tips." Miguel nodded, placing the glass on a shelf behind the bar. "I'm out. Don't forget to lock up if you're the last one." "Got it," Tina replied, though she had no intention of leaving anytime soon. As she watched Miguel disappear through the employee exit, she felt a flutter of anticipation in her chest. Bellini's was an upscale Italian restaurant in Manhattan that catered to New York's elite. Politicians, celebrities, and Wall Street executives regularly filled its tables, leaving generous tips that helped Tina make rent on her tiny Brooklyn apartment. But the real treasure of Bellini's, at least in Tina's eyes, wasn't the famous clientele or the authentic pasta. It was the baby grand piano that sat in the corner of the bar area. Tina listened carefully as the kitchen staff called their goodbyes. The manager, a stern woman named Diane, was the last to leave. "The alarm's set for 1 a.m., she reminded Tina. "Make sure you're out by then." "Will do," Tina promised, her fingers already itching. As soon as the door closed behind Diane, Tina slipped off her shoes with a sigh of relief. The cool marble floor felt heavenly against her tired feet as she padded quietly toward the bar. The restaurant was transformed at this hour. No longer a bustling hub of activity, but a peaceful sanctuary, with only the soft glow of accent lighting illuminating the space. The piano waited for her like an old friend. Gleaming black and perfectly maintained, it was usually played by a hired musician named Paolo who entertained guests on weekends. But Paolo didn't know, nobody knew, that on late nights when Tina closed, the piano sang under different hands. She slid onto the bench, feeling the smooth wood beneath her. For a moment she just sat there, her hands hovering over the keys, savoring the silence and the promise of what was to come. Then gently, she placed her fingers on the cool ivory and began to play. The music that flowed from her fingers wasn't the typical restaurant background tunes that Paolo specialized in. Tina played Chopin, intricate, emotional nocturnes that she'd learned by ear after listening to her mother play them throughout her childhood. Her mom had been a classical pianist in the Philippines before immigrating to America, where dreams of concert halls were replaced by the reality of multiple jobs and raising a family. Tina never had formal lessons. They couldn't afford them, but she'd inherited her mother's gift. She could hear a piece once or twice and reproduce it almost perfectly, adding her own interpretation that made the music uniquely hers. As she played, the weight of the day lifted from her shoulders. The rude customer who had complained about his steak, the spilled wine that had nearly ruined her uniform, the constant smile she had to maintain even when her face hurt, all of it melted away. In these stolen moments, she wasn't a waitress. She was an artist. The first time she'd snuck in to play after hours had been an accident. 6 months ago, after a particularly difficult shift, she'd found herself alone in the restaurant with a terrible headache and 15 minutes to kill before her bus arrived. The piano had called to her then, and she'd given in to temptation, telling herself it would just be for a minute or two. 1 minute had turned into 30, and she'd nearly missed her bus. But the peace she'd felt afterward had been worth it. Since then, it had become her secret ritual, this midnight recital with only herself as the audience. Tonight, she lost herself in Debussy's Clair de Lune, her fingers dancing across the keys with a delicacy that belied her calloused hands. The music swelled and receded like the tide, filling the empty restaurant with beauty that none of its wealthy patrons would ever get to experience, or so she thought. That was extraordinary, a voice said from the shadows. Tina's hands froze mid-chord, her heart leaping into her throat. She whirled around to see an older man standing near the bar, a forgotten jacket draped over his arm. She recognized him immediately. He was a regular, though not someone she usually waited on. He sat in the VIP section, often accompanied by people who looked important. I'm sorry," Tina stammered, rising quickly from the bench. I know I shouldn't be." The man held up a hand. Please don't apologize, and don't stop on my account. He moved closer, and in the dim light she could see he had kind eyes, though his expression was one of puzzlement. Where did you study? Study? Tina echoed, confused. Your technique is unusual, but your musicality, it's remarkable. Juilliard? Curtis? A nervous laugh escaped her. No, nothing like that. I've never had lessons. The man's eyebrows shot up. Never? He said it as if she'd told him she could fly. My mom played. I guess I picked it up from her. Tina was acutely aware of her uniform now. The white apron stained with tomato sauce, the sensible black shoes she'd slipped back on. She felt exposed, as if this stranger had walked in on her wearing her pajamas. Picked it up, he repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. Do you know who I am? Tina hesitated. She recognized his face, of course, but couldn't place the name. He was just table 12 to her, a good tipper who liked his martinis dry. The man smiled at her confusion. I'm Robert Chen. I conduct the New York Philharmonic. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Tina had served dinner to one of the most renowned conductors in the world multiple times, and she'd had no idea. I'm Tina, she managed, extending her hand automatically, then wincing at how informal it seemed. But Robert took her hand warmly. Tina, what you're doing hidden away in this restaurant after hours is nothing short of criminal. Before she could protest, he continued, music like yours deserves an audience. I'm just playing for fun, she said weakly. Fun, he exclaimed. Was the Sistine Chapel painted for fun? Were the pyramids built for fun? Tina couldn't help but laugh. I think you're giving me too much credit, and I think you're not giving yourself enough. Robert glanced at the piano, then back at her. Our regular pianist for the donor reception next week just canceled. Would you consider filling in? The question was so unexpected that Tina thought she'd misheard. You want me to play? For the Philharmonic donors? It's not an audition, he assured her quickly, seeming to sense her panic. Just background music for the cocktail hour. But it would put you in a room with people who might be interested in supporting a talent like yours. Tina's mind raced. She had bills to pay. Her mother's medication wasn't covered by insurance, and she was already working double shifts whenever she could get them. I don't even have anything to wear to something like that. Robert waved dismissively. Details. All easily solved. The important thing is the music. He pulled out his phone. Give me your number. My assistant will contact you with the details. Almost in a trance, Tina recited her phone number. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. One more thing, Robert said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. Would you play something else for me? Your choice. Tina glanced at the clock. It was nearly 1 a.m. and the alarm would set soon. But how could she refuse? She sat down at the piano again, took a deep breath, and began to play Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. It was a piece her mother had loved, full of passion and technical challenges. As she played, she forgot about Robert standing there. She forgot about the alarm, about her tired feet, about the bills waiting on her kitchen counter. There was only the music. When the last note faded, she looked up to see Robert staring at her, his eyes slightly wet. Extraordinary, he whispered. Absolutely extraordinary. As Tina locked up the restaurant 10 minutes later, her hands were shaking. Had that really happened? Had the conductor of the New York Philharmonic really invited her, a waitress with no formal training, to play at a donor reception? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Details for next Thursday. Car will pick you up at 6. Bring your passion. R.C. Tina looked up at the night sky, barely visible between the tall buildings of Manhattan. Somewhere up there, her mother was surely laughing at the absurdity of it all, or perhaps she wasn't surprised at all. She'd always told Tina that music had a way of finding the path it was meant to travel. As she walked to the subway, her tired feet suddenly didn't seem so heavy anymore. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope. The next few days passed in a blur for Tina. By day, she continued serving pasta and pouring wine at Bellini's, smiling politely as customers barely glanced her way. By night, she practiced on an old keyboard she'd bought secondhand years ago, its keys slightly yellowed and a few of them sticking when pressed too hard. You're going to break that thing, her roommate Lily commented, leaning against the doorframe of their tiny shared bedroom. You've been at it for hours. Tina flexed her fingers, which were cramping from overuse. "I have to be ready," she said. "This is my one shot." The donor reception was just 2 days away, and nervous energy buzzed through Tina's body like electricity. She'd already called her mother 3 times, each conversation ending with her mom in happy tears. "I always knew," her mother had said, "even when you were little, the way you played. It was never just notes to you. It was something more." Now as Thursday approached, doubt began to creep in. What if Robert had been mistaken? What if, in the dim light of the empty restaurant, her playing had seemed better than it actually was? What if she embarrassed herself in front of New York's elite? Her phone buzzed with a text. It was from Robert's assistant, confirming the car would pick her up at 6 p.m. the following day and asking about her dress size. Apparently they were arranging a gown for her to wear. A gown. Tina almost laughed out loud. The fanciest thing she owned was a black dress she'd worn to her cousin's wedding 3 years ago. Her shift the next day dragged endlessly. She mixed up orders twice and nearly spilled soup on a customer, earning a stern look from Diane. By the time 4 p.m. rolled around, her nerves were frayed. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Miguel said as she fumbled with wine glasses behind the bar. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired." Miguel raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. As she headed to the break room to collect her things, Diane stopped her. "Tina, we have a situation. Paolo just called in sick," Tina blinked. "Okay, but it's Thursday. He doesn't usually play until Friday and Saturday. We have a private event tonight, a last-minute booking for some tech company. They specifically requested live piano music." Diane looked at her with desperation in her eyes. "I've called 3 people from our backup list. No one's available." Tina felt her heart sink. The timing couldn't be worse. "I'm sorry, but I can't tonight. I have an appointment." Diane's expression hardened. "An appointment?" "Tina, we're talking about a party of 35 people who are paying premium rates. If we don't deliver what was promised, I really can't," Tina insisted, thinking about the car that would arrive in less than 2 hours, about the gown that was waiting, about Robert and his donors. "Then I'm not sure how much longer we'll need you here at Bellini's." The words hung in the air between them. Tina stared at her manager, the implication clear. Bellini's had been good to her. The flexible scheduling had allowed her to care for her mother when she was sick last year. The tips kept her afloat in one of the most expensive cities in the world, and now Diane was essentially telling her, "Choose." Tina's phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably another text from Robert's assistant. She ignored it. "Let me make a call," Tina said quietly. 5 minutes later, she was sitting in the employee bathroom, fighting back tears as she explained to Robert's voicemail that she wouldn't be able to make it that evening. An emergency at work. She was so sorry. Perhaps another time. By 7 p.m., the private event was in full swing. The tech executives were on their second round of cocktails. The appetizers were flowing from the kitchen, and Tina was sitting at the piano, playing the kind of gentle background music that Paolo usually provided, pleasant but unremarkable pieces that didn't demand attention. Her fingers moved automatically, but her mind was elsewhere. She imagined the donor reception now starting without her, the opportunity slipping away like water through her fingers. She'd called Robert's number 3 more times, but he hadn't picked up. She'd probably been replaced already, her chance gone before it had truly begun. As she transitioned into a simple rendition of Moon River, she closed her eyes, letting her disappointment flow through her and into the keys. Without meaning to, she began to elaborate on the melody, adding complexities that transformed the familiar tune into something richer, deeper. "Who's that playing?" she heard someone ask over the general murmur of conversation. "Just one of our waitstaff filling in," came Diane's reply. "Our regular pianist is under the weather." Tina kept her eyes closed, letting the music become her escape. If this was all she would ever have, these stolen moments at a borrowed piano, then she would make the most of it. She transitioned from Moon River into Debussy's Reverie, then into a piece she'd composed herself on those late nights alone in her apartment, something that had no name, but carried all her longing for something more than serving drinks and taking orders. She was so lost in the music that she didn't notice when the room gradually quieted. She didn't see the tech executives turn in their seats to watch her. She didn't notice a man in an expensive suit step away from his colleagues and move closer to the piano, his drink forgotten in his hand. It was only when she finished the piece and opened her eyes that she realized the room had fallen silent. Scattered applause broke out, catching her by surprise. "Don't stop," called a voice from the back. Flustered, Tina nodded and began Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of her mother's favorites. As she played, she became aware of a presence nearby. The man in the expensive suit had approached the piano and was watching her hands with intense focus. When she finished, he spoke. "That was something else," he said quietly so only she could hear. "You don't belong here." Tina felt her face flush. Was he complaining about her? Would this get back to Diane? "I'm sorry," she began, but he cut her off with a laugh. "Don't apologize. That wasn't an insult." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I'm Lee Davidson. I produce music for a living. Perhaps you've heard of some of my artists?" He listed off several names and Tina's eyes widened. Even she, with her limited exposure to the pop music world, recognized them. They were huge, chart toppers, Grammy winners. "What's your name?" Lee asked. "Tina," she replied, her voice barely audible over the renewed conversations in the room. The spell had been broken, and the tech executives had returned to their discussions, though several still glanced her way occasionally. "Well, Tina, I'd like to talk to you about your playing. Are you under contract with this restaurant?" She almost laughed. "No, I'm just a waitress. I'm filling in tonight." Lee's eyebrows shot up. "A waitress? With that level of skill?" He seemed genuinely shocked. "Who trained you?" "No one, really. My mom played. I learned by ear." He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Extraordinary. Listen, I'm hosting a charity gala at my home in the Hamptons next weekend. Small affair, just 100 or so people. My usual entertainment canceled last minute. Would you consider playing?" Tina blinked, wondering if she was hallucinating. This couldn't be happening again. Not after she'd just thrown away her chance with Robert. I don't know," she stammered. "I'll pay you, of course. $5,000 for the evening." Tina nearly fell off the piano bench. $5,000? That was more than a month's wages and tips combined. Plus, there will be people there you should meet. People who could help your career if you're interested in having one. A career. The word echoed in Tina's mind. She'd never allowed herself to think that far ahead. Playing the piano had always been her escape, her private joy, not something she could build a life around. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Lee smiled. "Sure, but not too long. I need to confirm by tomorrow." He handed her his card. "Call my assistant in the morning. Her number's on there." As he walked away, Tina felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Diane. "Whatever he said to you, forget it," her manager whispered urgently. "Keep playing. They love you." So Tina played on, her mind spinning with possibilities she'd never dared to consider. One door had closed tonight. The donor reception was surely over by now. But another had unexpectedly opened. As the evening wound down and the last of the tech executives staggered out, Diane approached her again. This time, her usual stern expression was replaced with something that almost looked like respect. "Why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" she demanded. Tina shrugged. "You never asked." To her surprise, Diane laughed. "Fair enough. Listen, Paolo's been raising his rates anyway. How would you feel about taking over on Thursday nights? We can work around your regular shifts." It was a peace offering and Tina knew it. But as she opened her mouth to accept, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a text from an unknown number. "Next time you stand up the New York Philharmonic, give more than 2 hours notice. Still, your playing must be special for Robert to be this disappointed. Call me if you change your mind. Eleanor Chen, Robert's wife." Attached was a photo of an elegant gown hanging on a door, the one that had been meant for her. Tina looked up at Diane, then down at Lee's business card in her hand, then back at the text message. 3 paths now lay before her where just this morning there had been none. "Can I let you know tomorrow?" she asked Diane. "I need to make a phone call first." Tina stood at the edge of Lee Davidson's sprawling Hamptons estate, feeling as out of place as a penguin in the desert. The morning sun sparkled off the ocean, visible beyond the manicured lawn, and staff in crisp uniforms bustled about. "Preparing for tonight's charity gala. This is where you'll be playing," Lee said, gesturing to a gleaming white grand piano positioned near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. "The acoustics are perfect." Tina nodded, unable to form words. She'd made her choice a week ago. She'd called Eleanor Chen to apologize, promised to stay in touch with Robert, accepted Diane's offer to play Thursday nights at Bellini's, and, most surprisingly to herself, said yes to Lee's invitation. Now standing in this palace by the sea, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "You look terrified," Lee observed, amusement in his voice. "I am," Tina admitted. "I've never played for this many people before. And certainly not for—" She trailed off, thinking of the guest list Lee had casually mentioned. Music industry executives, famous performers, wealthy donors. "Listen," Lee said, suddenly serious. "I didn't invite you here because you play like everyone else. I invited you because you don't. Whatever happens tonight, just play the way you played at that restaurant, like it's just you and the music." His words didn't entirely calm her nerves, but they helped. After a brief rehearsal and sound check, a staff member showed her to a guest room where she could rest before the event. "There's a dress in the closet," the young woman said. "Mr. Davidson thought you might need one for tonight." Once alone, Tina opened the closet to find not one dress but three, each more beautiful than anything she'd ever owned. Alongside them hung a note. "Choose whichever you like. They're yours to keep." LD Tina sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. Just 2 weeks ago, she'd been a waitress with a secret. Now she was in a mansion in the Hamptons with designer dresses and a $5,000 check waiting for her. Life could change so quickly, it was dizzying. She called her mother, who squealed with delight at every detail Tina shared. "I knew it," her mom kept saying. "I always knew someone would discover you someday." "It's just one night, Mom," Tina reminded her, trying to manage both their expectations. "I'm still a waitress. For now," her mother replied confidently. By evening, Tina had chosen the simplest of the three dresses, a deep blue gown that reminded her of the night sky. As she stood before the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The waitress uniform and practical shoes were gone, replaced by someone who looked like she belonged in this world of wealth and privilege. But inside, she still felt like an imposter. A knock at the door startled her. It was Lee, come to escort her to the main event. "Guests are arriving," he said. "You look wonderful. Ready to make some magic?" Tina took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The party was already in full swing when they descended the grand staircase. At least 100 people filled the enormous living room, spilling out onto the terrace beyond. Waitstaff, people just like her, Tina thought, circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "The first hour is just mingling," Lee explained. "You'll start playing at 8. Just background at first. Then we'll have everyone's attention for your main set at 9. Tina nodded, grateful for the chance to observe before performing. Lee introduced her to a few people, a record executive whose name she immediately forgot, a singer she recognized from magazine covers, a songwriter whose work she'd admired for years. Everyone was polite, but their eyes slid past her quickly, moving on to more important guests. She didn't mind. In fact, she preferred being invisible, watching the room, taking mental notes of who laughed too loud, who checked their phone constantly, who seemed genuinely engaged in conversation. At precisely 8 o'clock, Lee caught her eye from across the room and nodded. It was time. Tina made her way to the piano, sat down and began to play soft, elegant pieces, the kind of music that enhanced conversation rather than dominated it. No one paid much attention, which calmed her nerves. This wasn't so different from playing at Bellini's after all. As she relaxed into the music, she allowed herself to elaborate a little, adding flourishes to familiar tunes, infusing standard cocktail party pieces with her own style. Gradually, she noticed people glancing her way, conversations pausing momentarily as someone remarked on the music. Before she knew it, an hour had passed and Lee was tapping a spoon against his glass, calling for everyone's attention. "Friends," he announced, "thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity will help bring music education to underfunded schools across the country." Polite applause followed. "Now I'd like to introduce you to someone special, a remarkable talent I discovered just last week. Please welcome Tina Reyes." Tina felt heat rise to her cheeks as all eyes turned to her. This wasn't part of the plan. Lee hadn't mentioned an introduction. She forced a smile and nodded in acknowledgement. "Tina works as a waitress at an Italian restaurant in Manhattan," Lee continued. "She has no formal training, yet she plays with more heart than many conservatory graduates I know. I hope you'll listen closely to what she has to offer." A murmur ran through the crowd. Surprise, skepticism, curiosity. Tina wanted to disappear, to run back to her safe, anonymous life. Instead, she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was a challenging piece, one that had taken her months to master by ear. She knew its every nuance, every emotional peak and valley. As she played, the room faded away, and she was back in her tiny apartment playing for no one but herself. The piece built in intensity, her fingers flying across the keys, her body swaying with the music. She poured everything into it, her fears, her dreams, the weight of expectations. When the final notes rang out, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the room erupted in applause. Tina looked up, startled. The crowd had moved closer to the piano, their faces showing genuine amazement. Several people were wiping away tears. Lee stood at the back, arms crossed, wearing a satisfied smile. "Extraordinary," said a voice beside her. Tina turned to see an elderly man she hadn't noticed before. Thin, with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes, he had the posture of a much younger person. "Thank you," she said softly. "You play from somewhere most people never find," he continued. "Who taught you?" "No one," Tina replied, used to the question by now. "I learned by listening to my mother." The man nodded as if this explained everything. "I'm Anton," he said simply, offering his hand. Tina shook it, noticing the long, elegant fingers. "Do you play?" she asked. A ripple of laughter spread through those nearby. The elderly man smiled gently. "A little," he said. Before Tina could respond, Lee was at her side, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Anton," he said, "I had no idea you would be here tonight." "I wasn't planning to come," Anton replied, "but my granddaughter insisted." "She's on your foundation board." Lee turned to Tina. "Tina, this is Anton Petrov." The name meant nothing to her, and it must have shown on her face. "Anton is one of the greatest pianists of the last century," Lee explained. "He rarely appears in public these days." Tina felt her cheeks burn. She'd asked Anton Petrov if he played the piano. It was like asking Michelangelo if he'd ever tried painting. "I'm so sorry," she began, mortified. "I didn't—" "Please don't apologize," Anton cut her off. "It's refreshing to meet someone who judges me by what they hear, not by my reputation." He turned to Lee. "May I borrow your pianist for a moment?" Lee nodded, clearly thrilled by this unexpected development. Anton offered Tina his arm, and she took it, allowing him to lead her through the crowd to a quieter corner of the room. "You have a rare gift," he said once they were alone. "But gifts require nurturing. Tell me, what are your plans?" "Plans?" Tina echoed. "I don't really have any. This is all so new to me." Anton studied her face. "People will come to you after tonight. Managers, teachers, record labels. They'll all want to shape you into something marketable." Tina nodded, already overwhelmed by the prospect. "But before all that begins, I'd like to make you an offer." Anton reached into his pocket and produced a card with just a phone number. "I haven't taught in 15 years, but I would teach you if you're interested." Tina stared at the card in disbelief. "Why?" "Because talent like yours appears perhaps once in a generation," he said simply. "And because you play as I did before the world told me how I should play." As Anton walked away, Tina stood frozen, the card clutched in her hand. Across the room, she saw Lee surrounded by guests, all gesturing toward her and speaking animatedly. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, a text from her mother asking how it was going. The reality of what was happening finally hit her. This wasn't just a one-off performance for rich people. This was the beginning of something she'd never allowed herself to dream about. Later that night, as guests began to leave, a young woman approached Tina with a phone. "Someone recorded your performance and posted it online," she said excitedly. "It's already got thousands of views." Tina watched in amazement as the counter on the video climbed higher by the second. Comments poured in, people asking who she was, where they could hear more, if she had music available for purchase. "I told you," Lee said, appearing beside her with a glass of champagne. "You don't belong in that restaurant, Tina. You belong here, sharing your gift with the world." As Tina took the champagne, she felt the weight of Anton's card in her pocket. Two paths stretched before her again: Lee's world of glamour and connections, or Anton's offer of artistic development. Or perhaps there was a third path, one uniquely her own. 2 weeks after the Hamptons Gala, Tina sat in her apartment staring at her phone in disbelief. The video of her performance had now been viewed over 2 million times. Her inbox was flooded with messages, interview requests from music blogs, invitations to perform, and even a few recording contract offers. "I still can't believe this is happening," she told her mother over the phone. "Believe it," her mom replied. Her voice sounded stronger than it had in years, energized by her daughter's sudden success. "You deserve this. You've always deserved it." But deserving something and being ready for it were two different things. Tina had taken a leave of absence from Bellini's, unable to handle both her waitressing shifts and the sudden demands on her time. Lee had connected her with a lawyer who was helping her sort through the offers, separating the genuine opportunities from the exploitative ones. And then there was Anton's card, still sitting on her nightstand. She hadn't called him yet, unsure if she was worthy of being taught by someone of his stature. "What about that famous pianist?" her mother asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Have you called him?" "Not yet," Tina admitted. "Why not?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. "I guess I'm afraid," Tina said finally. "Of what?" "Of failing. Of disappointing him. Of finding out I'm not as good as everyone suddenly thinks I am." Her mother's sigh carried decades of understanding. "You know what I regret most?" she asked. "Not the hard times, not the struggles. What I regret is all the chances I didn't take because I was afraid." After they hung up, Tina looked at Anton's card again. Before she could talk herself out of it, she dialed the number. Their first lesson was set for the following Monday. Anton lived in a modest apartment on the Upper West Side, not at all what Tina had expected from a world-famous pianist. The walls were lined with books and old vinyl records. A baby grand piano took up most of the living room, well-worn but perfectly maintained. "Sit," Anton instructed, gesturing to the bench. "Play something for me. Anything you like." Tina chose a piece she'd been practicing, Liszt's Liebestraum. Her fingers moved confidently at first, but under Anton's intense gaze, she became increasingly self-conscious. She hit a wrong note, then another, then stumbled completely. "I'm sorry," she said, mortified. "I can play better than this." "I know you can," Anton replied calmly. "I saw you at Lee's party. But there you weren't trying to impress anyone. You were simply playing." He sat beside her on the bench. "Let's start with the basics. Show me how you hold your hands." What followed was a humbling experience. Anton methodically picked apart her technique, her hand position, her posture, her breathing. Everything she thought she knew about playing the piano was challenged. "You've developed remarkable workarounds," he observed. "But they're limiting you. It's like you've built a beautiful house on a shaky foundation." By the end of the 3-hour lesson, Tina's head was spinning with new information, and her confidence had taken a serious hit. But Anton seemed pleased. "You're a quick learner," he said. "Most importantly, you're willing to unlearn bad habits. That's rare." As she left his apartment, he handed her a formal-looking envelope. "The Manhattan Academy of Music is holding auditions next month for their special winter program. It's highly selective, but I think you should apply." Tina stared at the envelope. "A music school?" "I can't afford—" "Scholarships exist," Anton cut in, "and you would qualify. Think about it." The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Mornings with Anton, afternoons responding to inquiries and offers, evenings practicing what she'd learned. She still played Thursday nights at Bellini's, where she now drew a crowd of regulars who'd seen her viral video. After much deliberation, she decided to audition for the Manhattan Academy of Music. Anton helped her prepare a challenging program. Bach, Beethoven, and Chopin. That would showcase both her technical skill and emotional depth. The day of the audition arrived cold and gray. The academy was housed in an imposing building that made Tina feel small and insignificant as she climbed the steps. Inside, conservatory students hurried past, instrument cases in hand speaking in technical terms she only partially understood. The waiting area outside the audition room was filled with other applicants, all of whom seemed to know each other. They were discussing their previous competitions, their teachers, their years of training. Tina sat alone, trying not to listen, trying not to panic. A young man with glasses sat down next to her. "First time applying?" he asked kindly. Tina nodded. "Me too," he said, though his confident demeanor suggested otherwise. "I'm Tom. I studied at Juilliard for undergrad, but I'm hoping to work with Professor Wu here for my master's." "Where did you train?" "I didn't," Tina said quietly. "I mean, I'm studying with Anton Petrov now, but before that I was self-taught." Tom's eyebrows shot up.
Anton Petrov?
He doesn't teach anymore. He made an exception, Tina replied, uncomfortable with the attention this information was attracting from nearby applicants. Wait a minute, a voice said. A young woman with a severe bun had turned around in her chair. Are you the waitress from that video? Tina wished the floor would open up and swallow her. Yes, she admitted. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Some people looked impressed, others skeptical, a few openly dismissive. That explains it, the young woman said with a thin smile. Petrov always had a soft spot for novelty acts. Before Tina could respond, her name was called. Hands shaking, she entered the audition room where 3 judges sat behind a table, their expressions neutral. Ms. Reyes, said the woman in the center, your application is unusual. No formal training until very recently. Yet a recommendation from Anton Petrov himself, Tina nodded. Unsure what to say. Well, the woman continued, let's hear what you can do. The piano before her was the finest Tina had ever played, a Steinway concert grand that seemed to vibrate with possibility. She sat, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath, trying to remember everything Anton had taught her about proper technique. But as she began Bach's Prelude in C major, her mind clouded with doubt. She could feel the judges analyzing her every move, noting her technical deficiencies. The piece that had once flowed from her fingers now felt mechanical and lifeless. She moved on to Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, and things got worse. Her revised technique felt foreign, her fingers no longer responding the way they used to. She hit wrong notes, lost her place, nearly stopped entirely. By the time she reached Chopin, Tina was fighting back tears. This had been a mistake. She didn't belong here among these properly trained musicians. She was just a waitress who played by ear. A viral video curiosity, a novelty act, as that student had said. But then she remembered what Anton had told her that morning. When all else fails, forget everything I've taught you and play from your heart. So she did. She abandoned the rigid technique she'd been trying to master and returned to her natural style. Her fingers found their old patterns, her body swayed with the music, and the Chopin ballade came alive under her hands. When she finished, there was silence. The judges whispered among themselves, then the woman in the center spoke. Your technique is problematic, she said bluntly. Your Bach was hesitant, your Beethoven lacked structure. But your Chopin, she paused. There was something there worth developing. Tina left the audition feeling hollowed out. She had no idea if she'd passed or failed, only that she'd been exposed as the amateur she was. Anton was waiting for her outside. How did it go? He asked. Terribly, Tina confessed, the tears finally spilling over. I couldn't do it. All the technique we've been working on, it fell apart. Anton nodded, unsurprised. It takes years to internalize new technique. Months at the very least. You've had weeks. Then why did you want me to audition? Because you needed to see what you're up against, he replied. This world you're entering, it's not just about talent. It's about discipline, training, tradition. They walked in silence for a while. Will they accept me? Tina asked finally. I don't know, Anton admitted. But whether they do or not, our work continues. 3 days later, Tina received an email from the academy. She'd been accepted provisionally to the winter program, not as a full student, but as a special case under Anton's continued mentorship. The email included comments from the judges. One had advocated strongly against her admission, citing her fundamental technical deficiencies. Another had argued that her natural musicality outweighed her lack of training. The third had been swayed by Anton's influence. Tina read and reread the email, emotions swirling. It wasn't a full acceptance. It was more like probation. She would have to prove herself every day, facing skepticism from both faculty and fellow students. Is it worth it? She asked Anton during their next lesson. Maybe I should just take one of these performance offers instead. People seem to like how I play now without all these changes. Anton considered her question carefully. There are 2 paths before you, he said finally. The easy one leads to quick success. Play what people want to hear the way they want to hear it. You might have a good career. People will be entertained. He placed a piece of sheet music before her, a complex contemporary composition she'd never seen before. The harder path means learning the rules before you break them. It means facing criticism and doubt, including your own. It means years of work with no guarantee of success. His blue eyes held hers steadily. "But if you choose the harder path, you won't just entertain people. You'll move them. You'll make them feel things they can't express in words. Your music will live on after you're gone." Tina looked down at the intimidating sheet of music, then back at Anton. "When does the winter program start?" she asked. 8 months had passed since Tina first walked through the doors of the Manhattan Academy of Music. 8 months of grueling practice, of theory classes that made her head spin, of technique drills that left her fingers cramping, of sideways glances from classmates who'd been training since childhood. 8 months of breaking herself down and rebuilding from scratch. Now, she stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, peering through a gap in the curtains at the audience filling the seats. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Nervous?" Anton asked, appearing beside her. "Terrified," Tina admitted. He nodded approvingly. "Good. The day you stop being nervous is the day you stop caring." Anton had been her rock throughout this journey. When other instructors at the academy had written her off as hopeless, he'd defended her. When she'd wanted to quit after a particularly harsh critique, he'd pushed her to continue. When she'd made breakthroughs, he'd celebrated with her. Tonight was his gift to her, a spot in his retirement concert, where he'd invited a handful of his most promising students to perform alongside him. For most, it was a tremendous honor. For Tina, it was a test of everything she'd learned. 5 minutes, the stage manager called. Tina retreated to a quiet corner backstage. From her bag, she pulled out a folded piece of fabric, her Bellini's Waitress apron cleaned and pressed. She'd brought it as a reminder of where she'd come from, a talisman of sorts. On impulse, she tied it around her waist, over her elegant black concert dress. When Anton saw her, his eyebrows rose. "Making a statement?" "Something like that," Tina replied. "Is it too much?" He studied her for a moment, then smiled. "It's perfect." Anton's performance came first, a breathtaking rendition of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 that left the audience in stunned silence before they erupted in thunderous applause. One by one, his other students took the stage, each displaying flawless technique and artistic sensibility. Then it was Tina's turn. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said, "our final performer this evening is Anton Petrov's newest protege, a young woman whose journey to this stage has been anything but conventional. Please welcome Christina Reyes." As Tina walked onto the stage, apron still tied around her waist, a murmur rippled through the audience. She caught sight of familiar faces, her mother in the front row, eyes already glistening with tears. Lee Davidson with a group of music industry executives, Robert and Eleanor Chen, even Diane and several staff members from Bellini's. She took her seat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. For her program tonight, she and Anton had chosen a piece that showcased both her classical training and her unique style, a Chopin nocturne followed by her own variations on the theme. The first few minutes were pure Chopin, played with all the technique she'd worked so hard to master. Her hands moved with newfound precision, each note ringing clear and true. She could almost feel Anton nodding in approval from the wings. Then, as planned, she began to transition into her own interpretation, keeping Chopin's melodic structure but adding complexities, jazz-influenced harmonies, unexpected rhythmic shifts. This was where her natural musicality shone through, where her lack of formal training became not a weakness but a strength. She wasn't bound by tradition, by rules she'd never learned. As she played, memories flashed through her mind. Late nights at Bellini's, her tiny apartment with its second-hand keyboard, Anton's living room, practice rooms at the academy, tears of frustration, moments of breakthrough. All of it had led here, to this moment, to this music that was neither purely classical nor entirely her own, but something new and honest. When the final notes faded, there was a beat of silence. Tina held her breath. Then the hall erupted in applause. She rose, heart pounding, and bowed deeply. As she straightened, she saw Anton in the wings, clapping with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. Behind him stood Professor Wu, the most critical of her instructors at the academy, a woman who had once told her she had no place in classical music, now nodding in reluctant approval. The applause continued as Tina made her way backstage, where she was immediately enveloped in her mother's embrace. "You did it," her mom whispered. "You showed them all. The next hour passed in a blur of congratulations, business cards pressed into her hands, offers of future performances. Lee Davidson introduced her to a recording executive who wanted to discuss an album. Robert Chen mentioned the Philharmonic's Young Artist program. Through it all, Tina felt strangely calm. The panic that had gripped her before the performance had been replaced by clarity. Eventually, the crowd thinned, and she found herself alone with Anton in one of the practice rooms. "So," he said, "what comes next?" It was a question Tina had been asking herself for weeks. She had options now, more than she'd ever dreamed possible. Record deals, concert tours, prestigious programs. The path to success that had once seemed impossibly distant now stretched before her, clear and inviting. "I've been thinking about that," she said. "I want to keep studying with you if you'll have me." Anton nodded, unsurprised. And I want to start a scholarship fund for musicians like me, people with talent but no access to training. Maybe using some of the money from the recording contract Lee's been pushing. A worthy cause, Anton agreed. "Anything else?" Tina hesitated, then continued. "I'm going back to Bellini's." This did surprise him. "As a customer, I hope?" "As a pianist," Tina clarified. "Thursday nights like before." "I've already talked to Diane about it." Anton frowned. "You could be playing in concert halls around the world and you want to perform in a restaurant?" "I want to do both," Tina explained. "The restaurant is where I found my voice. It's where people heard me when no one else was listening. I don't want to forget that." She touched the apron still tied around her waist. "Besides, there might be another waitress out there somewhere with another hidden talent. Maybe she'll hear me play and think, if she can do it, so can I." Anton studied her face for a long moment, then smiled. "You know, when I first heard you play at Lee's party, I thought, here's a diamond in the rough. But I was wrong." "Oh?" Tina raised an eyebrow. "You weren't a diamond. Diamonds are cold, perfect things that look the same from every angle. You were something else entirely, something warmer, more alive. Something that grew not despite your circumstances, but because of them." He rose from his seat, joints creaking slightly. "Most of my students want to be famous. They want to be the next great pianist, the next Anton Petrov. You just want to play music your way. That's why you'll surpass them all." 2 weeks later, Tina sat at the piano in Bellini's playing for the Thursday night crowd. The restaurant had changed since her Carnegie Hall debut. There was a small sign by the entrance announcing her as a special weekly performer. And reservations for Thursday nights were now booked months in advance. But in other ways, nothing had changed at all. She still knew the staff by name, still helped clear tables when they were shorthanded, still wore her apron when she played. Between sets, a young woman approached the piano. She was dressed in the black and white uniform of the waitstaff, her expression hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "I've been writing songs and I was wondering, how did you do it? How did you go from this," she gestured at the restaurant, "to Carnegie Hall?" Tina smiled. "I played like no one was listening until the right person heard me." "And then everything changed?" "No," Tina corrected her gently. "Then the real work began." She patted the bench beside her. "Sit. Tell me about your songs. And when your shift ends, if you want, I know a piano where we can work." As the young waitress began to talk, eyes bright with possibility, Tina felt a sense of completion. Her journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning, but the circle was closing. One dream inspiring another. Later that night, as she locked up the restaurant, Diane had finally given her a key. Her phone buzzed with a text from Anton. "Tokyo Philharmonic requesting you for spring concert series." "Interested?" Tina smiled as she typed her reply. "Yes, but only if I can wear my apron." She slipped her phone back in her pocket and stepped out into the New York night, where the city hummed with 8 million stories, each waiting for their moment to be heard. Hers had been just one, but it had opened doors for others, both the door behind her, where a waitress with songs in her heart now had a chance, and doors all over the city, where talent that might once have remained hidden would now have a way forward. Tomorrow, she'd be back at the academy, wrestling with a particularly difficult Beethoven sonata. The day after, she had a recording session for her first album. Next week, a meeting about the scholarship fund she was establishing. But tonight, she was simply Tina, no longer just a waitress, not quite a classical pianist, but something uniquely herself, walking home with music in her head and the faint smell of Italian food clinging to her clothes, smiling at the strange and wonderful path that had brought her here, to this perfect in-between place where dreams and reality finally met.